Well, thank you all very much for coming. My name's Simon Bittleston. I am the Managing Director at Meta Praxis. Very pleased to welcome you to today's seminar, the first in a series on tomorrow's CFO. So today's seminar is all about how finance can help drive performance improvement in organisations. What we're going to talk through today and the approach is simple, and we don't apologise for that. It's an approach that our clients have chosen to follow, and over the last 5 years, they've all outperformed their industry sectors by, on average, about 25%. And that's probably the only time today we will take correlation over causation, but we do, it's a fantastic achievement on their part, and we do hope and believe that the approach has at least helped them. So what are we going to cover? A quick set of introductions into Meta Praxis, who we are, the Tomorrow CFO programme, and our partners in CIMA. Next, we're going to spend about half an hour, 40 minutes looking at the methodology and the approach that we've just talked about how you can improve your business performance cycle. We're going to run the diagnostic we've already mentioned, which is why you've all kindly brought your tablets and smartphones. We'll probably do that midway through. Then we're going to give you an example of where we've actually worked with a client to apply these approaches, how it works using our software, and that will be led by my colleague James Darton. Finally, I'm delighted to say we've got a panel of practitioners here. We have Naomi Smith from CIMA. Naomi is Head of Policy Research and has recently published the CIMA Chartered Institute of Management Accounting Global Accounting Principles. We also have Richard Giles, who is the FD of the De Beers downstream business, and we have our own visualization guru, Mr. Andrew Mosley. So that will be a short interactive session. We have some questions for them, but please do take that as an opportunity to ask some questions yourself. And then we'll close. And we will come back to the diagnostic that we've all completed and see how everyone's done. And you can choose to remain anonymous in it, as I've seen some raised eyebrows already. Right, unless anyone has any questions now or have realised they've come to the wrong room, I will press on. So, a quick introduction to Meta Praxis, CIMA, and the programme. At Meta Praxis, we're specialists in financial planning, analysis, and data visualisation. Essentially, what we do is we deliver enterprise performance management solutions that help our clients to make better plans and take better informed decisions. We're massive believers in technology. Technology is a huge enabler in this area. We have a product we're very proud of, but we also believe, and I think we're backed up by Gartner here and a lot of their latest research, that especially for corporate performance management, it needs to be combined with a good approach and methodology if you're going to achieve the actual business benefit. So that's us. CIMA is the world's largest leading professional body of management accountants, recently partnered with the AICPA in the States, and I think they now represent over 500,000 trained management accountants globally. We've worked with CIMA for over 10 years. We have a very shared set of principles and goals, but we've also partnered in 2010 with CIMA to create a more intuitive online accounting course that helps to essentially embed a more intuitive understanding of accounting and also helps provide people with some improved commercial aptitude. So that's CIMA. So what is the concept behind tomorrow's CFO programme? The traditional role of the CFO, I think we're all pretty comfortable with, and it may even sound more like the role of today's financial controller. Financial reporting, financial control, risk management, and analysis of historic business performance. There's no doubt, though, the last 30 years, that role has evolved enormously, and in probably the widest piece of research done on this by Ernst & Young, in which they interviewed over 1,000 CFOs across the US, across Europe, and Asia. They've pulled together a list of 5 new elements and responsibilities of the finance function and the CFO specifically, based on their views of today's CFO. And these are the things they believe tomorrow's CFO has got to be equipped to cope with. The first, providing insights to management, and that's forward-looking insights. You might have thought that was something they should have been doing already. It's something they said they now think they need to do. Second, developing and defining the company strategy. You got that? This table looked like they're doing quite well. 3, funding the execution of that strategy. 4, leading the strategic finance initiatives. And 5, presenting progress to external stakeholders. There are quite a lot of other things you could have put. I'm sure they would have been very good answers. These are the top 5 Ernst & Young came up with. Who got 5? Who got 4? Suddenly the hearts start beating. Who got 3? Any table got 3? Oh, 2 tables got 3. How many prizes do we have? So, Anushka, prize for this table and prize for this table. So thank you for humouring me on that. There is a more serious point here. We like charts as a company. This one's really quite simple and quite hard to see on this projector. Value on the vertical axis, necessary desired on the bottom axis. Financial control, absolutely required. But I think the summary of that report is that driving business performance and actually leading strategic development are becoming prerequisites for tomorrow's CFO and the finance function. And that is very much the domain of what Gartner call enterprise/corporate performance management. And that's very much what we're going to focus on today. And that's from the methodology perspective. And for us, that is all about improving and accelerating what we call the business performance cycle. So what is the business performance cycle? We start by talking about where the business performance cycle came from. Another question, what do you see here? Can anyone tell me what they see? Buckets. What are buckets made out of? Plastic. What's this? Can anyone? This isn't a trick question. Wire. And how many things are there on that side? How many products are there? Lots of products. Wire and plastic products. Long way of getting there. Now known as WPP Group. Originally made, I think they originally made shopping trolleys. Bought by, still do, apologies. Bought by Sir Martin Sorrell, 1985, to have a publicly listed business with which to launch an advertising agency. So that's 1985. We're going to wind forward to 1993. To help you with that passage of time, this is the Rolling Stones in 1985. This is them in 1993, and this is them today. I don't know what that tells us, but that's the time over which has elapsed. Back to 1993, they've kicked off. WPP has grown. They've bought Ogilvy and Mather. They've bought JWT, amongst a lot of other different marketing agencies. The recession's hit, and things need to change. Action needs to be taken by management to improve margins, to reduce costs, to diversify. The founder of MetaPractice is sitting in the office of the CFO, a guy called Robert Lowell at the time. This is his computer. Halfway through the meeting, Robert Lowell jumps up and he says, and he grabs a report from off a shelf full of 150 different reports, and he says, look at the results. We've analysed these results. It's obvious what action needs to be taken. Now, let's see what he was doing. What Robert Lowell was doing was saying, we've got results. We measure those results. He's analysed those results. And he said, it's obvious what we should do. In truth, it was obvious what to him, what needed to be done. But it certainly wasn't obvious to the business what needed to be done. If it was obvious to the business, they would have done it. They all got huge bonuses for running the operating companies. If they knew what needed to be done and they agreed on what needed to be done, they would have done it. And that's really because what was missing here were 2 very, very important steps in the business performance cycle, and 2 of the steps that are notoriously done by finance really quite badly, and they are dialogue and commitment. You can measure everything, you can analyse everything, but if you don't have the dialogue with the business and you don't get the business to commit to the best form of action, the right action won't be taken and the results won't improve. And that is the business performance cycle. It isn't complex, but it is proven and it is very, very important. Now, we're going to go on to talk about each step in that performance cycle and how we can improve it and how we can accelerate it. But before we do that, it is also possible to give yourself a score for your own business performance cycle by giving yourself a percentage through our superb diagnostic, which I hope you're all going to do in a minute. I should warn you, though, that your score is not simply the average of each stage. It is actually the product. So you could be extremely good at 4 out of 5 of those stages, but really, really poor in one, and your score will be very, very low. And that does reflect reality, because if you're missing one stage in that business performance cycle, the whole thing does break. So we're now just going to look, I spend not too long, about half an hour overall, in fact 20, 25 minutes, on each of the different stages of the business performance cycle. We are going to be doing the next two seminars will be looking at two stages in much more detail. So I am going to have to skim through some of this, which I apologise, but I'm sure I'm doing it in your best interests. Measurement. Measurement's the first stage. So what can we measure? Start with another matrix. Start as finance people in our heartland, which is internal financial results. I'm sure everyone measures those. Even those can be broken into past and future, numeric and text. Not going to read out every example. Hopefully you can read from all different parts of the room. But internal financial information is obviously an absolute prerequisite, very important to measure. Alongside that, non-financial information, still internal, but is very, very important. It's generally the leading indicators of your results. Examples of those here as well. Now, to complement this set is external information, and this is external data, and this is more and more widely available in a structure that CPM can use. It is the heartland of data lakes, data discovery, data scientists, big data, all those fantastic catchphrases that the marketing people make up to make you spend lots of money. Have data refineries is the latest from IBM. It is the heartland of that. That doesn't mean that having analysed it, you can't pull through some of the key insights from that in a structured way to complement your own management information. And again, some more examples of all of those different things you can measure from there. Now, that's what you can measure. The real question, though, the really important question is, what should you measure? Getting this wrong has two major impacts. The first one is if you measure all the wrong things and present that to the wrong people, people can take very bad decisions. If people don't understand how that performance indicator affects the output of your goals as a business, the wrong decisions can be taken. And secondly, if you choose to measure everything, you will spend an enormous amount of time and money on technology. So what our suggestion for this is to pull together something that's extremely simple, and this is an even simpler version of that. It's called a business driver diagram, and the goal here is to connect all the different drivers of value in your business to the end goal of your business. This is a very simple build-up for a retail organisation. Again, in a future seminar, we're going to be looking actually predominantly at these and looking at them across a lot of different industries and in more detail. So what should we measure with the goal of gross sales in a retail business? Gross sales made up very simply of the total number of transactions that are put through and the average value of each of those transactions. What drives those? Total footfall, or total hits on your website, depending on what channel you're looking at, and the conversion, so the amount of people who come into your store and don't say they're just looking. Bottom half, the net price per unit you achieve after all the discounts that you've given, and then units per transaction. That achieves your average transaction value. Finally, some external drivers, again, not complicated. Total footfall, well, what drives that? It's the total addressable market, so your catchment area, or the socioeconomic group you're targeting on the internet, and your market share percent. This is deliberately simple as well, but the goal here is to create one unified model across your whole business that you embed across the business with everyone who has decision-making capability. And the reason you do that is you measure the right things, but the second reason is, I'm sure you've all been in meetings where people receive some analysis and a lot of time is wasted on the impact that analysis is going to have on the business, and very little time is spent on talking about, well, what can we actually do to improve results, and what levers can we pull to change likely future performance. You'd be amazed how many clients we meet whose top management teams don't actually have that one fundamental model of the business in their heads. And a lot of time is wasted in management team meetings and on boards simply discussing this and disagreeing on what actually drives what. It's a hugely useful amount of their time to spend 3 hours in a room workshopping this and agreeing it. And after that point, you have a unified team. So develop that model and embed that model. Summary of the key principles. Consider all financial non-financial, internal and external drivers of performance. Connect the drivers to the outcomes in that simple business model. Embed that understanding in the business and measure the drivers as well as the outcomes in a timely and accurate fashion. We do have takeaway sheets, incidentally, which have list a lot of these key principles in case you want to take them away with you. Please don't leave them behind. But they are the key principles for measurement. It's not meant to be complex. Does anyone have any questions on measurement before we move on to analysis, which gets a bit more exciting? Okay, so analysis. What are the key principles involved in analysis? First of all, does everyone know what one of these is? This is an iPod Shuffle. If anyone can tell me who said this, they can have the iPod Shuffle. That is really good work. That's extremely quick. It's very embarrassing. It's my own brother. Well done. Do you want to catch? Yes, I was actually going to give you a prompt. Albert Einstein. Don't have first degrees in mathematics turn up to your event. Yes, it's Albert Einstein. But there is a very important principle here. Simplicity is absolutely key. Whenever you present a business message, our goal is to do that in as simple a way as possible because it massively increases the time of discussion and the insight the individuals get. Next, keep it visual. Visualization is a hugely effective tool in presenting information to decision makers, largely because it utilizes our eyes, which is one of the most effective ways of getting things into our brains. The second part of that is that our visual system has something called pre-attentive processing. And pre-attentive processing is what we do automatically. We don't have to think about it. It's very, very quick. It's an extremely powerful way of transmitting information into our minds. And I'm going to give you a very, very simple example here. Can you tell me what you see on this board? Just shout things out. It's balls. One blue, one red. Okay, so we got there in about 10 seconds. How much quicker can you do it now? You got there immediately. Now that's a deliberately simple example. But again, this principle is something that we've seen applied at board level. And we'll give you some examples of real visualization or real visualization for decision making. But the principle of taking advantage of visualization and pre-attentive capability can dramatically increase the value of information presented to boards, especially boards. So boards meet irregularly. They generally don't know, or often, I should be careful what I say here, they often don't know the business as well as executives, which I don't think is unfair or unreasonable. They're an extremely expensive meeting and they don't meet for very long. Most board packs that we see look a bit like this, which you probably saw on the way in and got very nervous on how many slides we're intending to present. They're huge tomes. They're full of tables of numbers. They essentially cut the business by all the different dimensions so that every board member can understand absolutely everything about the business. They're not particularly insightful, and 90% of board meetings are spent talking about what's happening in the business rather than talking about what can be done to improve performance. So key second message, make it visual. Let's explore visualization a little bit. We're going to look at two different types of visualization. We're going to look at tables, form of visualization, and we're going to look at graphs. Another slightly gratuitous image, when should we use tables? There is actually quite a serious question, though, behind when should we use tables. Who can make some suggestions on when tables are an effective form of visualization? It's going to be a very long evening. Would you like me just to take you through this? So when are tables a good form of visualization? When each value matters. When people have to see every single value in that table, that's a good time to use a table. When there's a requirement for absolute precision. It's quite difficult to provide absolute precision on graphs all the time. When you've got a small data set, and that's probably the biggest takeaway. More than one unit of measurement. And also when numbers differ by an order of magnitude. So that it would be extremely difficult to show a graph where you're looking at 1 to 10% and you're also looking at 2 billion revenue. By the time you've got 2 or 3 different comparisons, that graph's making no sense. So that's when you should use tables. How many accountants have we got in the room? No one ever admits this. How many non-accountants have we got in the room? Okay, so we've got about 50% more accountants than originally put their hands up by the differential. Accountants love tables. I think the only thing accountants like more than tables is Excel, and they generally use Excel to create tables. This is the sort of table accountants generally use Excel to create. Visualization still applies, best practice still applies to tables, and in fact it applies even more so. It's extremely important because it's very, very difficult to understand the business performance in that table. Here is a simple example of the same table. We've applied 4 different tools. Take off the lines, highlight the headings, add in a small trend on the left-hand side here, just so people get a general idea of is this KPI over a longer period of time going up or down, and use colour to show the variances. Now, there's not a massive difference between those cells. There's no difference in the content, but there's a huge difference in how much people are going to take in and where their eye is going to look to understand where the problems are. When should we use graphs? This is pretty much just negating the 4 we've done, but I'll still take you through it. When the trend or the pattern in the data matters. So less the precision, but when the trend or the pattern matters. For emphasis, graphs are emphatic. When you've got multiple comparisons, and probably the most important, when you've got large volume of data. Now, there's an enormous amount of different graphical tools out there. I think Excel, on the latest count, has at least 30 different types of graph. I think they've managed to get a floating pie chart in. I'm sure they've also got some 3-dimensional cones in. I'm not convinced they're the best things to use to get the message across. We don't have time, unfortunately, to go into all the different types of visualization that we work on as a business, but we have spent an enormous amount of time and effort to create essentially a classification of graph types that are deliberately chosen because they get the business message out and they are best practice for management teams for providing insight to the business. Trend charts, cross-sections, variances, radars, impact analyses, frequency distributions, and scenario graphs. And we will look at a few now. My favourite is actually the most simple of them all, which is the trend chart. We're looking here at net sales. What you see, or hopefully what you can see, if the projector is powerful enough, is the grey background is the budget. The orange bars are the actuals. The blue bars are the forecast. The blue markers are last year's results. And then below, we've added a cumulative variance line. It's got a huge amount of information on one piece of paper, but it's done in a way that the message is actually relatively simple. Year to date, we've got a cumulative variance of about 56 million, and management think that actually they're going to hold that position to the end of the year. That's one of my favourites. In future seminars, we are going to be going through all the different visualization techniques, but I'm sparing you that today. The next key point is focus on the future. The real value in corporate performance management is the ability to tell the organisation what's likely to happen, because it is on that which people can act. Now, right now, the business message isn't coming out very clearly in this chart, and that's for a reason. You've got, what are we looking at here? This is the monthly trend in net sales. Starts in 2010, and it's for the full year 2010 and 2011. The orange line are the actuals, and they're single period, so what has the business achieved in each month? The very light grey line, if you can just make it out, is the budget, and the blue line is the future forecast. The first thing to do here or the first thing we would do here is run a moving annual total through this. And the benefit of that is you can really understand the trend. So a moving annual total, in every month, you're totaling the previous 12 months to achieve the equivalent annual revenue. That makes the message much, much clearer to start with. The business is performing well. It is performing behind budget as at June 2011. Management believe that they are going to continue, they're going to turn that around, and they're going to essentially hit budget for the rest of the year, maintaining their variance to budget by the end of the year. The next thing we tend to do here, and this is a CFO favourite, is we apply some scenarios, essentially some statistical calculations to this chart in order to try to give the CFO some ammunition, or the finance function, some ammunition to challenge those forecasts. I'm not going to build these up. These are really quite simple. So these are, assume that the business hits budget, assume that it achieves the same profile as last year, assume that it continues to perform against budget as it has done year to date, and assume that it continues to perform against last year as it has done year to date. So they're all historic and they're all very, very simple. Often we'll actually build in some more market-orientated and market-based scenarios. But what does this tell us? So the middle yellow line is the average of all of those different scenarios. That is the statistical average. That is what we would say the mathematically likely outcome, provided we've chosen the right scenario. The dark blue line is the management forecast. The difference between those two lines, if that dark blue line's above the yellow one, which it is, that's saying you have a very optimistic management forecast on your hands. Where it below, that's essentially saying you're sandbagging. Now, that's focus on the future. The next step for us is then, and the final principle that we believe in is make it actionable. I'm going to have a go at making this actionable. It is a little bit more complex. I'm not going to talk you through all the calculations, and I'm going to give you a bit more of a top-down description. How would we make this actionable? Well, what does the CFO need to know? The CFO needs to know what is driving, which regions and which products are driving the difference, that optimistic forecast. So if you're to the left of the zero line, you're being optimistic. This is the total markets range. On this chart, you can see there's about 150 million variance. This is in billion. That variance is the difference between the yellow line and the zero. That's your 150 million swing. That's saying your overall forecast is optimistic by about 150 million, 125. Who are the worst offenders? North America are optimistic. South America actually look like they're going to achieve their forecast. Asia Pacific are just as bad as North America, and Europe are all over the place. So let's pick on Europe. Where does it sit? Well, Germany are behaving the worst. A huge surprise there. UK and the Nordics aren't doing much better. Which products? Well, Astro's the worst, fruits are the worst, and River Pure. Now, this is an anonymized example. The goal here is to give the finance function the ability to pick up the phone, speak to the FDs in those regions and say, talk me through why you're forecasting so much higher than what we think is likely to occur. This is anonymized, but I was digging into which clients account we anonymized it on, and it was actually, I think it was actually a loo paper producing business. So I would actually really have given a lot of money to be in those meetings in which the business were trying to explain that the demand for loo paper was really going to ramp up in the last 6 months of the year. So ensure it's actionable. It's two other things. They're not key principles. It's more important to be correct than make it visual. Obviously here, they've spent an enormous amount of money creating a large, round, floating pie chart, probably using Excel, but they haven't spent a huge amount of money counting or summing up their percentages. And separately, also, make sure it brings out the real business message. I haven't taken from this that the price of diamonds is dropping dramatically from 1980 to 92, Richard, something that's probably very close to your heart. That's the challenge with infographics. This is an infographic. It's designed to be engaging, but you can go too far. So a summary of our key principles on analysis. Keep it simple. Make it visual. Focus on the future. And ensure it's actionable. Now, I'm running out of time in my stint, so if it's all right with you, unless there are any questions on analysis, a lot more to come in future seminars. I'm going to slightly pick up the pace in these next two sections. Dialogue, as we discussed, is a vital part of the process. The first principle here, involve the business in the planning process. Sounds obvious. Huge amount of time our clients pull together plans. They're pulled together by their finance team. They're tested with the business. They achieve the business goal, but no one feels particularly bought in. We've actually got an example, I think, coming up of specifically where we've worked with the clients who actually make that as dynamic as possible and as interactive as possible. But involve the business in the planning process. Otherwise, they won't have any dialogue about results at all. Take advantage of technology. Again, we're very proud of our product, but there are a lot of products out there, and what they enable is in-meeting analysis and in-meeting interrogation of likely future performance. That saves an enormous amount of time, and it actually gets real dialogue, rather than going into a meeting and someone saying, well, yeah, but of course, you know, if A, I don't trust the numbers, or B, what if, though, we actually manage to decrease stock by 10% next month and we get a bunch of new orders? That should solve our problems. And everyone sort of smiles, nods, and says, well, we'll go and ask finance. Let's have that in the meeting. We can do that these days. It should be taken advantage of. Create forums for discussion. It's not something finance particularly like doing. It doesn't need to be a meeting. It could be a WebEx. It could be an online chat. But finance do have a role to promote the dialogue around the likely future performance. And the simplest of all, but the one that's often broken the most by finance teams, publish performance in a consistent and timely fashion, because people do base their month's work around when results are available and when analysis is available. So there are 4 key principles for dialogue. Finally, commitment. Ensure there's alignment of the goals of the business, to the goals of the business. Generally, incentivization, there's a lot of other methods, but if people don't actually care about care about achieving the goals, there's going to be no commitment to act. Back to the business driver diagram, make sure people understand and really understand the impact of different decisions that they make. So embed the understanding of the business driver diagram. Enable effective interpretation. Analysis. Accounting is seen generally as a bit of a dark art, and a lot of people in business, especially in a cross-functional team, don't really understand how the P&L, the balance sheet, the cash flow all interact to achieve the end goal. It's something, this is really more, I think, in Naomi's area, but there are a lot of good courses out there, and there's a lot that finance should do to partner with the business to help people to develop that understanding. And lastly, again, very obvious point, remember everyone's different. Not everyone, extroverts and introverts prefer to engage in that dialogue in a very, very different way. Likewise, to use the Myers-Briggs terms, thinkers will want to understand all of the information from the bottom up first. They will really want to believe in that top-level number before they're comfortable discussing it. Feelers will say, I just want to understand the bigger picture here, guys. So you have to have the ability to provide the business a dynamic set, a different set of analyses and different forums to really engage and really get that commitment. And that really is the business performance cycle as we see it. It's not complicated, but it really is important, and we're now going to see, I think, an example of a technology business and of how we've helped to improve that business performance cycle, essentially in practice, using an interactive planning process for their 5-year plan.